There's something I've noticed about life, and maybe you've seen it too. The hardest moments, the heaviest battles, the nights when you feel like you can't take another step, those are often the times when you're standing on the edge of your breakthrough. It's almost like life tries to throw the biggest storm right before the skies clear. The pressure increases, the resistance multiplies, and you start to wonder, why is this happening now? Why does it feel like everything is getting worse instead of better? But could it be that the very pressure you're feeling is proof that something is about to shift? Think about it. When a woman is in labor, the pain is most intense right before the baby is born. The contractions get stronger, closer together, more unbearable. And yet, that pain is a signal. It's not random. It's not punishment. It's the body pushing out the promise. And I wonder how many of us are mislabeling the pain of transition as the end, when really it's the beginning. What if the discomfort you're feeling isn't a sign that God has abandoned you, but that He's about to bring forth something greater in your life? Because isn't it true that when we get closest to the promise, the pressure feels the strongest? The temptation to quit is the loudest right at the edge of breakthrough. The enemy knows he can't stop what God has started. So his only option is to convince you to give up before you see it. That's why the fight intensifies. That's why your thoughts start running wild with doubt. That's why the weight feels unbearable. You're closer than you realize, and the pressure is evidence of the promise. I think about stories in Scripture where people were on the verge of something miraculous, and the battle seemed impossible right before the breakthrough came. The Israelites stood at the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them. That moment must have felt like the worst-case scenario. They couldn't see a way forward. They couldn't go back. All they had was the impossible in front of them and the threat of destruction behind them. But it was in that moment, when it looked like the end, that God made a way through the sea. The moment of greatest pressure became the stage for His greatest power. And isn't that how it works in our lives? When your back is against the wall, when every option seems closed, when the pressure is suffocating, those are often the moments when God reveals a way that you couldn't have planned, predicted, or even prayed for. You were asking Him to fix it, but He's about to split it wide open. You were asking Him to ease the pain, but He's using the pain to bring something new into existence. The greatest pressure often precedes the greatest breakthrough. But here's the thing. In that moment of pressure, you have a choice. You can let the weight crush you, or you can let it push you into what's next. You can let the voice of fear tell you it's over, or you can believe that this is just the enemy trying to distract you right before your deliverance. Pressure is uncomfortable, but pressure is purposeful. Diamonds aren't formed in comfort. Oil doesn't flow without crushing, and breakthrough doesn't come without a battle. Maybe you've been asking, why is this so hard right now? And the answer might be simpler than you think. It's hard because you're close. It's intense because you're near. The enemy doesn't fight empty threats. He fights future victories. He sees the potential in you. He sees what's on the other side of your obedience, and he's throwing everything he can to stop you. But he's too late, because the pressure isn't going to break you. It's going to birth something in you. And let me remind you of this. Just because you feel pressed doesn't mean you're crushed. Just because you feel surrounded doesn't mean you're defeated. God has a way of using the very thing that was meant to bury you as the soil that grows you. That heaviness you're carrying, it's not random. It's working. It's pressing. It's producing. The breakthrough you've been praying for might not be far away. It might be closer than you think. So don't give up in the pressure. Don't quit in the contractions. Don't let the intensity of the battle make you forget the victory that's coming. The pain you feel is not permanent. It's producing something powerful. And when it comes, when the breakthrough finally breaks forth, you'll look back and realize that the pressure wasn't there to destroy you. It was there to deliver you. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to mistake waiting for wasting? When things don't happen in the time frame we expect, we start to wonder if God even heard us. We start to think maybe the door is never going to open. Maybe the prayer is never going to be answered. Maybe the dream was just a fantasy. Waiting has a way of messing with our perspective, because in our culture, waiting is usually seen as a punishment. But what if it's not punishment? What if it's preparation? Sometimes we confuse delay with denial. We think because it hasn't happened yet, it won't happen at all. But God doesn't work on our schedules. He doesn't operate according to our timelines. He's not in a rush like we are. We want the breakthrough immediately, but He wants us ready for it. Because a breakthrough that comes before you're prepared for it isn't a blessing. It's a burden. And there are some things you're praying for right now that God isn't withholding from you. He's protecting for you. He's keeping it in place until you're strong enough, wise enough, and mature enough to carry it. Think about Joseph. He had a dream at 17 that he would be in a position of leadership, but it took years of pits, prisons, and betrayals before he stepped into that palace. At 17, Joseph wasn't ready for the weight of leading a nation. He had the vision, but he didn't have the character. And so God allowed him to walk through seasons of preparation, not because he had forgotten the dream, but because He was forming Joseph into the kind of man who could sustain it. The delay wasn't denial, it was development. And that's the same thing happening in your life right now. You're asking God, why is this taking so long? But what if He's asking you, will you trust me in the process? Because the waiting room is where faith grows. It's where patience is stretched. It's where dependence is deepened. Waiting feels like nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, everything is happening. Roots are going down deep so that when the fruit shows up, it can last. Frustrating. I know it's painful to see others move ahead while you feel stuck in place. I know how hard it is to celebrate someone else's breakthrough while you're still waiting on your own. But what if their timeline has nothing to do with yours? What if your delay isn't proof that you're behind, but proof that God is working on something specific in you? He's not making you wait because He forgot you. He's making you wait because He's forming you. The problem is, we often pray for the promise but resist the process. We want God to open the door, but we don't want Him to train us to handle the responsibility on the other side. We want the marriage, but we don't want to become the person who knows how to love selflessly. We want the promotion, but we don't want to develop the discipline to steward influence. We want the breakthrough, but we don't want the breaking that makes room for it. But the breaking is necessary. The waiting is necessary because God is not just preparing the blessing for you, He's preparing you for the blessing. When you look back over your life, you'll realize some of the greatest gifts God gave you were the seasons He didn't let you skip, the doors He didn't let you rush through, the moments when He said a not yet instead of a yes. Those seasons taught you resilience. They taught you faith. They taught you how to stand when everything in you wanted to quit. And when you finally step into breakthrough, you'll see that the waiting wasn't wasted. Every tear, every delay, every silent season, it was all a setup. Even Jesus waited. He spent 30 years in obscurity before He stepped into public ministry. 30 years of silence for 3 years of impact. Oh, forgive me. Why? Because even the Son of God walked through seasons of preparation. He wasn't wasting time. He was being made ready for the mission. If He needed preparation, why would we think we don't? So don't despise the delay. Don't curse the waiting. Don't assume the silence means God has abandoned you. He's closer than you think, and He's working in ways you can't see yet. And when the time is right, when the preparation is complete, when the foundation is strong enough to carry the weight of the promise, the breakthrough will come, not a moment too late, not a moment too soon. Sometimes when we think about breakthrough, we imagine this dramatic, earth-shaking moment where everything changes at once. We picture the walls falling in an instant, the sea parting with one great sweep, the miracle showing up in a way that leaves no room for doubt. And while God can do that, He has done that. It's not always how breakthrough looks in our lives. More often than not, breakthrough isn't just in the big moment. It's hidden in small, consistent acts of obedience that nobody else sees. We love the idea of a sudden shift. But what about the slow, steady faithfulness that builds toward it? What about those days when no one's watching, when no one's clapping, when you're doing the right thing, and it feels like nothing is happening? That's where God often places the key to breakthrough. It's not always the one giant leap of faith. Sometimes it's the daily choice to keep walking in the same direction. Sometimes it's waking up and praying again, even when yesterday it felt like your prayer hit the ceiling. Sometimes it's loving that difficult person one more day, even when you feel like giving up on them. It's in those ordinary, unseen steps that God is setting you up for something extraordinary. Think about Naaman in the Old Testament. He was a powerful commander, but he had leprosy. When the prophet told him to dip 7 times in the Jordan River, that must have felt insulting, even foolish. Naaman wanted a big, spectacular miracle. He wanted the prophet to come out, wave his hand, call down fire, and heal him in an instant. But instead, the instruction was simple. Dip in the water. Not once, not twice, 7 times. And it wasn't until he completed that act of obedience that his skin was restored. The miracle wasn't in a dramatic show. It was hidden in repeated, ordinary obedience. That's how God often works. He'll give you something that doesn't look like enough, that doesn't look impressive, and he'll ask you to trust him with it. Because obedience opens doors that talent, status, and effort alone can't open. The small step you're tempted to dismiss may be the very step that positions you for breakthrough. It might look ordinary, but when God breathes on it, it becomes extraordinary. The danger is we overlook the little things because they don't feel big enough to matter. We think, oh, what difference does it make if I forgive this person? What difference does it make if I show up and serve when no one notices? What difference does it make if I pray again when nothing has changed? But every time you choose obedience, you're building momentum toward the moment God has appointed. Every act of faith is a seed. You may not see the harvest today, but that doesn't mean the seed isn't growing beneath the surface. Some of you are closer than you think, but you're tempted to quit because it feels too small. Don't despise small beginnings. Don't underestimate the power of one step. The Israelites marched around Jericho for 6 days and nothing happened. Imagine the frustration day after day, lap after lap, and not even a crack in the wall. But on the 7th day, when they obeyed one more time, the walls came down. The walls didn't fall because of their strength. They fell because of their obedience. And that's the same thing in your life. Your obedience is doing more than you think it is. The walls might not look weaker. The sea might not look like it's moving, but something is shifting in the unseen. And when the time comes, all the small steps of obedience you've taken will add up to the breakthrough you've been waiting for. The truth is, breakthrough doesn't usually come to those who wait for the perfect moment. It comes to those who keep being faithful in the imperfect moments. The quiet decisions to stay, to believe, to obey, to give, to forgive, those are the building blocks of miracles. You may not get to choose when breakthrough comes, but you do get to choose whether you'll be ready for it when it does. So don't quit on the small steps. Don't despise the daily grind. Don't discount the acts of obedience no one else sees. God sees them. He honors them. And he uses them as the very pathway to your promise. It's amazing how much of life comes down to perspective. 2 people can walk through the exact same situation and come out of it with 2 completely different stories. One sees only defeat, the other sees development. One walks away broken, the other walks away stronger. The difference isn't the obstacle, it's how they saw it. And that's the truth about breakthrough. It's not just about what happens around you. It's about what happens within you. Your perspective determines your perseverance. Because if you see every obstacle as a dead end, you'll quit. If you see every delay as rejection, you'll stop pressing forward. If you see every closed door as proof that God has abandoned you, you'll walk away before you reach what he promised you. But if you shift your perspective, if you start seeing obstacles as setups and delays as development, then suddenly what looked like the end becomes a beginning. What felt like loss becomes preparation. And that perspective gives you the strength to keep going when everything in you wants to give up. Brittany, think about David. Before he ever faced Goliath and bears while tending sheep, to most people that would look like an unimportant, forgotten job. But David didn't see it that way. He didn't see himself as wasting time in a field. He saw every challenge as training. So when he stood in front of Goliath, he wasn't intimidated. His perspective was, oh, the same God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this giant. That perspective gave him perseverance. Somebody else could have looked at Goliath and thought, he's too big to fight. David looked at him and thought, he's too big to miss. That's the power of perspective. And maybe that's what you need right now. A shift in how you're looking at what you're facing. Because if all you see is the size of the problem, you'll lose sight of the size of your God. If all you see is the pain, you'll miss the purpose. If all you see is what's against you, you'll forget who's for you. And without that perspective, you won't have the perseverance to keep pressing forward. Sometimes the difference between breakthrough and breakdown is how you choose to see the situation. If you believe God is still working, you'll keep showing up. If you believe there's purpose in the pain, you'll keep walking through it. If you believe the promise is still on the other side, you won't stop short. Perseverance isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the right perspective. The enemy knows this, which is why his greatest weapon is often not what's happening to you, but how you interpret it. He wants you to see the setback as final. He wants you to see the closed door as proof that God doesn't care. He wants you to magnify the problem until you lose sight of the promise. But if you can shift your perspective, if you can declare, well, this obstacle is not the end, it's the evidence that God is preparing something, then you'll have the endurance to outlast the enemy. And I've learned that perseverance isn't always about strength. It's not always about who can run the fastest or fight the hardest. Sometimes it's simply about who can keep their eyes fixed in the right place. When Peter walked on water, he was fine as long as his perspective was fixed on Jesus. But the moment he shifted his focus to the wind and the waves, he began to sink. The storm didn't change. His perspective did. And that perspective determined whether he sank or stood. So maybe the breakthrough you're waiting for doesn't require God to change the situation as much as it requires him to change the way you see it. Because when your perspective shifts, perseverance follows. When you stop seeing the valley as a place of defeat and start seeing it as a place of growth, you'll walk through it differently. When you stop seeing the waiting as wasted time and start seeing it as preparation, you'll endure it with hope. When you stop seeing the battle as punishment and start seeing it as positioning, you'll keep fighting even when you feel tired. That's why perspective is everything. It fuels perseverance, keeps you standing when you should have fallen. It keeps you believing when you should have given up. And it keeps you moving forward when everything in you wants to turn back. So whatever you're facing right now, don't let your perspective limit your perseverance. Don't let the enemy convince you it's over when God says it's just beginning. Don't let the obstacle in front of you blind you to the promise ahead of you. Shift your perspective and you'll find the strength to keep pressing on. There's a reason the moments right before a breakthrough feel so heavy. It's because the enemy knows if he can't stop what God has promised you, the next best thing he can do is try to stop you. He wants you to quit at the edge. He wants you to give up just a little too soon. He knows you're closer than you realize, so he tries to convince you that it's never going to happen. That's why the discouragement feels stronger. That's why the doubts seem louder. That's why the pressure feels greater. Because the enemy doesn't waste his energy fighting something that isn't a threat. The intensity is a sign you're near. I think about the people of Israel. After years of wandering in the wilderness, after all the waiting, after all the struggle, they finally stood at the edge of the promised land. And do you know what the enemy did? He didn't roll out a welcome mat. He didn't step aside and say, come on in. No, there were giants in the land. There were fortified cities. There was resistance. Isn't it interesting that the promise was surrounded by obstacles? But that's what breakthrough looks like. It's not the absence of opposition. It's the presence of God's power in the middle of it. And the saddest part is some of them turned back. They were so close, but they let fear talk them out of it. How many of us are guilty of the same thing? We've prayed, we've fought, we've persevered, but right at the edge of the promise, we give up. Right when the healing is near, we stop believing. Right when the breakthrough is about to break forth, we stop pressing. And all the while, God is saying, don't stop now. Don't quit here. You're closer than you think. Breakthrough isn't always about some massive leap forward. Sometimes it's about taking one more step when you feel like you can't. It's about making one more choice to believe when doubt is screaming in your ear. It's about waking up one more morning and deciding I'm not giving up yet. Because what if the very next prayer you pray is the one that shifts things? What if the very next step of obedience you take is the one that unlocks the door? What if the very next act of faith you choose is the one that tips the scale? You may be closer than you realize. That's the tricky part about breakthrough. It rarely announces itself ahead of time. You don't get a warning text saying, tomorrow's the day. You don't get an email that says, your miracle is on the way. Estimated delivery time, 3 days. No, breakthrough often shows up in ordinary moments. And if you quit before you get there, you'll never know how close you were. I wonder how many walls would have stayed standing if the Israelites had stopped marching on the 6th day. I wonder how many seas would have stayed shut if Moses had stopped lifting his staff too soon. I wonder how many healings would have gone unseen if people had stopped reaching for Jesus in the crowd. Breakthrough doesn't come to those who quit at the edge. It comes to those who refuse to stop. That's why perseverance matters so much. Not because the journey is easy, not because the waiting isn't long, but because the promise is worth it. And maybe right now you feel tired. Maybe you feel like your prayers aren't working. Your faith isn't enough, your strength is running out. But that's exactly where grace shows up. Because it was never about your strength in the first place. It was about your willingness to keep going, even when you don't feel like you can. Don't stop now. Don't let the enemy talk you out of what God has already spoken over your life. Don't let the fear of giants keep you from the land that's already yours. Don't let the silence of waiting convince you that God has forgotten. You're closer than you think. And the enemy only fights this hard because he knows what's on the other side is worth it. So lift your head. Take the next step. Pray the next prayer. Believe one more time. Because this is not the moment to give up. It's the moment to press in. The promise is near. The breakthrough is coming. So hold on, don't let go. Don't back down now. What you've been praying for, what you've been waiting on, what you've been believing for, it's not as far away as it feels. You are standing closer to your breakthrough than you think.